mission. We are all searching.
My name is Brent Vaughan, and our company is Multihull Central. We specialise in selling some of the world's best cruising multi-hulls, catamarans and trimarans, for people who want to go, cruising, proper cruising. And one of our missions is to try and help people go cruising earlier and take what we call a sabbatical. And sometimes this is done mid-career, which is far more popular in other parts of the world than it is in Australia. But we're trying to help enlighten people on how to do this. And Andrew's story is a really good example of doing that. Having spent the last 12 months or so cruising around Asia, 18 months, yeah, and a technical diver, has got some really interesting stories and highlights of that trip to show us today. So we'll go through that. I'll introduce Andrew Grace from Seawind 1160 Pali to the stage.
What I'd like to go through today is really just give you an overview, particularly around the build process and delivery. Because I was actually in Asia, it was pretty easy for me to pop across to Vietnam and go through that build program with Seawind. I'll talk a fair bit about location and routes that we took, and then also why based in Singapore, the sort of 3-day trips, 4, even 2-week trips you can do around that area. A little bit about culture and safety, because that's everyone's concern when you're in Asia, is what is it like to actually be up there and be cruising on a boat. And then from up this presentation, you probably realise that my hobby is actually partly sailing, actually, but more technical diving. So my background also is, I've done a lot of technical diving, both overseas, but also in Australia as well, and particularly around rebreather diving. My wife is also a very passionate underwater photographer, and so a lot of these slides I'll show a bit later on, her photos that we've taken over the past 12 months. And then also a little bit about the communication and what sort of tech I have on the boat. The boat is fairly basic, but we do have a few things on there that makes cruising safe. And then a little bit of some tips on vlogging. When I first started doing these sort of vlogs, particularly on YouTube, it was because there was no one out there actually, that there was not much information on Seawind, and in particular the boat that I wanted to buy. So once I bought the vessel, I thought other people could benefit by having some sort of information out there online, particularly if you want to buy a boat, but also if you just want to go cruising. So this is just an intro video to sort of set the scene. This is our vessel sailing actually just off the Singapore Straits. So this is around about 20 nautical miles west of Singapore. about the build process. So for me, the decision to buy a new boat, it was made fairly easy because I could actually have it built and I could actually be pretty close by when it was being built, and the delivery times were fairly short. It was roughly 6 months. So it was a pretty quick build and delivery. Gives you just an idea. I signed the contract in May of 2015 and then picked up the boat in January. There's actually a bit of logic of why you want to pick up a vessel in January from Vietnam, and that's because of the trade winds. And so basically I'll talk a little bit about that in the routing, but the time of year of when you either want to come back to Australia or you want to go up to Asia is very dependent on what the trade winds are doing. There was around about $90,000 of extra stuff you need to have on a boat to get it so that you can do blue water cruising and be self-sufficient. This vessel has the standard 20 horsepower outboard Honda engines, so it's very easy to maintain. And once again for Asia, sometimes getting diesel can be a problem, but you can always get petrol for outboards, and these are 4-stroke Honda engines. So anywhere you go, whether it's a little village or even off a little canoe, you can always buy fuel if required. The other thing is we set the boat up with a bowsprit. The reason for that is because of the light winds. Around Sydney you can go from 40 knots to 10 knots in one day, whereas in Singapore generally that sort of area is often 8 to 15 knots. If you get 20 knots of wind you're really happy, but generally it's light wind sailing. The other thing we did was made sure the saloon area is a little bit larger than normal. This particular vessel, the Seawind Lite, has quite a small settee area, and we extended that out just to make it more comfortable when you're on the settee. And I guess the other key one is the test sailing. So whenever you take a vessel, particularly a new one, you need time to sort out stuff on the bugs. So even a new vessel will have a bedding in period. We had about a week in Vung Tau, which is basically the bottom end of the Saigon River, which is Ho Chi Minh. That, probably even a bit longer would be good, but there were issues that were picked up in that test sailing period before we left to sail down to Singapore.
So I just arrived at the Marine College. This is where Pali Pali is temporarily. It's here for about 3 days, and then we head down to the main river mouth and the open ocean. This is actually right in the heart of Ho Chi Minh, and so the boat is here temporary. So the great thing about catamarans, doesn't matter if they sit on the bottom. So you can see the tidal falls that happen around here. We've got at least a 4 meter, maybe even it's a 5 meter tide, so quite a lot of tide fall. Do some test sailing. Just call out the speed now.
6.1.
6.1 knots, and how much of wind?
9.4 true wind.
So 9.4 true, and we're doing 6.5.
Yeah, with the apparent wind angle is about 90 degrees.
So just call it out again now, what you got?
So we got 12 knots true wind speed, and we're doing 7.6 knots, 7.7 knots. So the apparent wind angle of around 100 degrees.
So you can see on that sort of test sailing, we had sort of everyone on the boat from Seawind, including Richard. So it was really a sort of a good test of the vessel, and it went over quite a few days. The other one probably everyone's most interested in is the routes. So here's an overview of basically the area that we were sailing in. We were not sailing in this dark, really windy area you see down the bottom there, below Sumatra. We were sailing above that area. And basically, I don't know if everyone can see this map here, but you can see where Singapore is, which is just up here. And I guess we can see the space between where Vietnam is and where you've got Malaysia, and then the bottom is Singapore. That area there is where we were sailing, and basically you've got two types of wind groups that sort of operate in that area. You've got the northwest monsoon and the southeast monsoon. Northwest is coming from Vietnam down, and then the southeast is coming up around the sides here from Australia. This weather map was taken just recently, so you can actually see they're in a transition period right now. All that blue area is very light winds, like you'd be motoring, you wouldn't be sailing if you were there right now. So this is a bit more detail showing the area. The area that you can see there right now, which is in the green, that is the area we were sailing in. So you've got, this is Singapore, and then you've got this green area there, and the boat was delivered from Ho Chi Minh at the top there, down to Singapore, and sailed around this area. Obviously, if you're coming back to Australia, you would continue to keep going on the highward side, so don't go below Sumatra and keep coming across. So this was taken from Predict Wind. So this is a weather routing software you can use. First thing to remember about any weather routing software is often it's not accurate. It's a guide. But you can see there it's offering different tracks. And interesting enough, I just did this just a few days ago. The track we took when we picked up the boat was the yellow track you can see there. And we basically were not far off that. So we didn't follow the rum line. We were slightly off that, and that was in January. And so in January, you've got the winds that are coming from Vietnam heading towards Singapore. So it's very relaxed downwind sailing. And it took us 4 days from Vietnam to get to Singapore. And that wasn't pushing the boat at all. In fact, we were sort of averaging quite low speeds because we had not more than 10 or 12 knots of wind the whole trip. This is a bit more of a drill down of what's available around Singapore. And the reason I keep coming back to what's around Singapore, it's a great place to base yourself out of, either in Singapore or actually on Indonesia, on an island called Batam. And on Batam, there's a very good quality marina. You can leave your boat and you can fly in and out if necessary, and the boat is safe and secure. And you can also, they have changed the rules in Indonesia now, where you can bring your boat in for 3 years without paying import duties. So it's very easy to move in and out of Indonesia these days. And that's another reason why we actually kept our boat on Batam. But some of the areas up the top here is where that pin, that is Tioman Island, and there's some great locations there for sailing. In the South China Sea on the side there, you've got some different islands and atolls there. And then further down to the bottom corner, there's also some lovely spots that are literally only 2 days sailing away at maximum. This is an indication of what Tioman Island looks like. It's very rarely cruised by cruising vessels. Often you might be, of 3 or 4 boats that are actually there. So it also has a marina as well, but that marina is often full. So it's actually better just to anchor outside the marina. This is some more photos of the different islands around Tioman Island. And Tioman Island, for everyone, is based in Malaysia. So that would be clearing customs out of Singapore or out of Indonesia, sailing across into Malaysia. And it's a very simple process. It's just like when you travel by air and you go into a country, Malaysia is probably the easiest place to clear in and out of. this is the track here for Bawah Island, and I think this is probably the most beautiful island in the whole of the Southeast Asia. Island itself is being developed as a, I guess it's a 6-star resort, but that's only recently it's started to develop like that, and they haven't actually finished the resort yet. But the actual lagoon, it has one of the best anchorages that I've seen in this whole area. And this is this next one. This next one here shows you the plot to get there. So this is a little bit over a day away out of Singapore. On the way there are also these little atolls that are just sticking up out of the ocean. You can't really anchor at these locations, but they're great dive sites because you're going from around about 60 to 70 metres of water right up to where this pinnacle is, and you get a lot of pelagic fish that work around these coral atolls that are there. And actually on this little pinnacle is a lighthouse that was built there by the Japanese during the war for navigation. So we did actually a few nights we have anchored in places like this, but you have to be very careful because if the weather conditions change, you've got no protection there. So this is actually Bawah. So from that little pinnacle I showed you, this is another 6 hours away by sailing. And this island itself, when you look at it, you go, well, I'd probably anchoring where that blue water is. But one of the first things you realise is that all the charts around most of Southeast Asia are wildly inaccurate. And so you would never ever want to go to these places at night and use the charts. They're just totally wrong. And I'll show you why in a minute. So see where the pin is? That's where we were anchored. All right, so that's where the pin is. So that's a lovely natural little bay. To actually get into that inlet, you've got to have a fairly shallow draft. So at high tide, you need to draw a maximum around about, our boat draws 1 metre, but if you drew anything more than 2 metres, it could be touch and go to get in there. But I have seen big power boats in there, like a 60-foot power boat can get into this location. And then part of the resort process is that they've built up moorings so more boats can get in there. But the period of time that we were travelling there, we were the only ones there really. So we were the only ones using the moorings. These are the bungalows that have been built, so they're not finished as yet. This is us on the mooring. So all those bungalows are still being built there. Their concept is it's owned by a guy from the UK who bought the island, and he'll fly people in by seaplane to stay at this resort. Now, the good thing about actually having a resort like this, because normally I don't like going to resorts, but in Asia what it does, the presence of the resort actually protects the coral, because still widely throughout Asia they do dynamite fishing. And the fact that now there's a presence there full time, when you dive this particular area, the coral is pristine because they've chased away all the dynamiters. this is quite funny because it's called Badass Island Group, and it's pretty badass. It's literally 2 days away, but a lot of different island chains there. But what they do there, though, you will hear dynamite fishing, and so often you'll be underwater and you hear the bangs going off. They're not close. They could be 5 or 6 kilometres away because the sound travels so much underwater. But it is also a very lovely area to cruise in a vessel. This is just the plot of basically if you were to go there, it's depending on what speed you're doing, it's basically really 2 days. This is another location, and I thought this would be good to show you as well. This is about 1 day directly south of Singapore. This location, you can see on the map, you look at it and go, well, where would you anchor there? So looking at this, at the charts, once again, this looks pretty good, but could be dodgy. Actually up there is a very good anchorage, but quite shallow. So once again, our boat is shallow draft, but when the tides swing, there's a big current through here, often you're only in a metre of water there. But funnily enough, I'll show you a picture, we actually anchored here, which is according to the chart on the coral. So that's it there. So that on the chart is coral, and directly underneath the vessel there we had 10 metres of water, and that whole channel is going to the side there is 10 metres. So a lovely location, but once again, the charts, you've really got to go there and sort of do it in steps. So definitely don't sail into an anchorage at night. Go there during the day, and if you arrive at night, you've got to stay offshore until you can get the light in the morning to see where the reefs are. So here's just some video footage of this actual site. So that's using a drone, and it brings up an interesting point. Actually, the price in drones have come down, and also the technology and their ability to be very good at actually using them as a navigation aid has increased. So that's using a DJI Maverick drone. You can actually launch them just single-handedly and catch them single-handedly. And we've used that on a number of occasions to find sites like this. And it's a way that you go to the most secure place that you think you can anchor, throw the drone up, and then have a look around to maybe it's a better place. And I think you'll see that technology used more and more with cruises, and it's pretty cheap. When you consider radar costs you nearly $3,000 or $4,000, for $900 you can actually get a very good navigation aid. Just also around that site, what I should tell you is that, so see how beautiful it is there? Also, in between those periods of time, so around just before the changes of the seasons, so when you go from the northwest monsoon to the southeast, there's around, 2 or 3 months of poor weather. And we were actually at this site, and it looks really good. And then we had unforecasted 40 knots come through. It was only blew 40 knots for around 2 hours, but it wasn't very pleasant in that location. So that's the other thing, is that you can have the best weather forecasting tools, but it won't pick up these subtropical storms that come through. They're just unforecasted. So you also need to think about that when you're anchoring, particularly in the evening. So every evening we'd always have the dinghy up and be ready to go just in case something like that came through. Just going around culture and security, this is something that people sort of ask all the time. And I've also lived in Papua New Guinea, and this is also a question people were asking around PNG. And a lot of it has to do with situational awareness. And so understanding that if something starts to look a bit dodgy, don't hang around. Just be prepared to pull up your anchor and leave if you think you're in that situation. Don't try and sort of force your way through. So just before I go into this, one example that I had was we were on a very small atoll, and we had a mooring down actually. So it actually made our own mooring and tied off a coral bommy. And some fishermen came by our boat, and there was around about 10 of them on the boat, and they were spear fishermen. And so they ended up anchoring about a metre from our boat. And we have Andy on board who can speak the local language, but we just didn't feel comfortable that we wanted to spend the night with 12 spear fishermen next to us. And so we just pulled up mooring and left. And we could do that literally in 10 minutes. Just dive it under the mooring and off you go. So we didn't sort of hang around and say, well, this is my spot. There's no etiquette or road rules in Asia. So sometimes it's best just to move on. Here's another really interesting point, is that Asia isn't all Muslim, actually. There's a lot of areas that are Christian. And so Batam itself is 50% Christianity. Also, if you go to North Sulawesi, it's mainly all Christian. And so it's a very, very dynamic culture, very friendly people. As mentioned before, having a bilingual person on board is good. And just be prepared that really, if something looks a bit suspicious, just leave, because you've got a boat. You can go somewhere else. Probably the most risk you'll have in Asia is at night. And that's just because AIS doesn't exist there. There are a lot of vessels. Big vessels might have it, but there's thousands of vessels that are just little boats. And there's literally thousands of fishing trawlers, and none of those will have AIS, and they'll just run you down. So I've seen examples of cruises that have come through into the marina where we're at that have been hit by fishing trawlers. And so that's something you need to be prepared, or you need to have good radar. But at the end of the day, it comes down to good crew. So always have a vigilant crew.
You don't have navigation lights today, or?
No, no navigation lights at all. I mean, you might find someone that has just some flashing lights, but there are thousands of vessels with no navigation lights at night. And then the final one is inaccurate charts. So here's an example. So this is the statue of Christ. This is in Indonesia. So it's a good example of the different diversity of cultures that are actually throughout Indonesia. And interestingly enough, you can see the statue of Christ here. Look at the jetty. It's actually in the shape of a cross in the water. So I guess this gets to the point of why do we go sailing. So for me, sailing has been, I enjoy sailing. Actually, I enjoy kite surfing as well. But the main reason to go to somewhere and experience something different was around diving. And particularly in my wife's case, it's around her photography. But I just enjoy diving. And from that, we have sort of moved into more technical diving, which is using rebreather systems. So the best way to explain a rebreather is that's this contraption that you can see just here. It's recirculating air, basically. So rather than using compressed air all the time and just breathing that out, you breathe the same loop all the time. And that's a really basic explanation. But the reason you do it is that, one, you can dive for longer. It is possible you could do on that system that you can see there. You could dive underwater for 5 hours if you wanted to. So that's the first point. The other one is around the stealth involved in a rebreather. So you can interact with animals underwater in a lot more closer proximity, and you don't scare them away. And so you'll find your experience underwater is greatly enhanced by using a rebreather.
So did you have a scuba compressor on board to retop them back up?
Yeah, so we have a very small scuba compressor on board. It's called a Poseidon Bawah. Basically, it takes around 20 minutes. It's a petrol-driven one. It takes around 20 minutes to fill a 90 cubic foot tank. But that system there, if I just go back, it's only using 2 litre or 1.5 litre tanks. So it literally takes around 2 minutes and the tank's full. And then one tank is full with air and the other tank is full of pure oxygen. And so the rebreather is mixing those two as you dive.
Is it filtering the carbon dioxide or just add more oxygen?
Yes. So part of the process is that there is a filtering system that filters out the carbon dioxide as you breathe out. And that's the key to the rebreathers. And that allows you to keep rebreathing it as well as adding small amounts of oxygen because your metabolism will be using oxygen as you swim underwater or move around.
So you've got a scuba compressor for your air, but what about the pure oxygen?
Yeah, so the good thing about pure oxygen is that it's available anywhere you go, basically, and you can just use industrial oxygen if you have to, but generally you can get medical oxygen as well all throughout Indonesia, but it comes in G-size bottles, and so I would normally just get a G-size bottle and put it on the boat, and then from that G-size bottle I have another small boosting system which is driven from compressed air, which actually fills these small tanks full of oxygen. So there's a little bit more work in it, but actually once you set it up, it's actually easier than open circuit diving because you've got to fill tanks all the time. This system you set up once and it's good for the whole day, and the next day you do it again. Just a little bit on the camera systems we're using. This I guess is fairly high end. You're talking a Canon or a Nikon system in underwater housing, and then you're using flash photography. But as I'll go through some of these photos, you'll see that the benefits of using that type of system are quite dramatic, and these are high resolution photos. They're not really done justice on this screen because I had to dumb them down, but a lot of these shots are 52 megapixel camera, so it's got a lot of detail in the photographs. So I'll run through these now. I'll go through them fairly quick, otherwise we could spend all day just going through these pictures, but this shows you the type of coral diversity, the type of marine life that is all throughout Asia, and the barrier reef is well known for its diving diversity, but actually Asia blows the barrier reef away.
And there's bleaching there, or?
Not really. There are areas that do have some bleaching, but the more damage you see there is more from blasting and from man-made damage. The coral also is a different type of coral. This water temperature that we're diving in is 29 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
If you had 29 degrees Celsius on the barrier reef, the whole reef would be bleached.
Yes.
So it's a hardier type of coral, but that's actually good news for our barrier reef because as the barrier reef does increase in temperature, these coral spores can come down and repopulate the reef. So it's not all doom and gloom that people tell you. This is just a typical setup. We keep the rebreathers just on the back seats, and they're ready to go. That's set up ready to go diving. I think someone asked a question around what type of booster. This is the booster unit itself. This is what it does. It takes in low pressure oxygen, and then it's driven by actually air, and then allows you to boost up oxygen. So you might have oxygen that is at, if I talk in PSI, it might be easier, 2,000 PSI. It'll boost it up to 3,000 PSI. And that's the setup there. If you've got a very big boat, a very big, vessel, you can have these systems set up permanently. But because our boat's 1160, it's only 40 feet long, it's not huge. So what we do is we set the systems up, but when we're sailing, obviously all this is packed away because you don't want to be sailing your boat with all this stuff exposed. This is another good example of sort of the type of corals you'll see. And so if you're diving there without a flash, or you're diving there without a light, underwater light, you wouldn't see these colours. This picture was taken actually quite deep. This was around about 50 metres underwater. And so it's quite a deep dive, but on a rebreather that's not really called deep. It's a pretty standard dive for a rebreather dive. But you can see the quality of the coral, and you can see some of the fish life that's there. This is a frogfish, and so you'll see a lot. You know, it's funny. I've dived the Barrier Reef a lot, and I've never seen a frogfish till I went to Asia. And these guys vary in size. Some are around the size of your fist. Some can be as big as a soccer ball. And they're probably one of the weirdest looking fish you'll ever see. They basically hop around. It's just another shot. You can see that I'm diving without a wetsuit, so it's pretty warm. The good thing about diving around there are the whale sharks. So you don't need to go to Western Australia to Ninjaloo. These guys will actually come up to your boat sometimes. There's certain seasons. Right now is actually the whale shark season in Asia, particularly around Singapore. And it's not uncommon that you'll be anchored. And this guy actually came around the back of the boat. And so we jumped in the water and just took some shots. Some occasions you'll see them every weekend. And this particular whale shark was hanging around the back of the boat. There was a couple, but the last one was nearly 7 meters long. So imagine this huge whale shark. Also, the mackerel life is pretty good. So it's not just around pelagics. There's also some very interesting. These are nudibranchs, and there's so many varieties of nudibranchs. Basically, they're underwater sea slugs, but some of them are very pretty.
Any Spanish dancers up there?
Sorry?
Any Spanish dancers up there?
Yes, I have seen a Spanish dancer. Probably one. Actually, I haven't seen a lot. Mainly more pelagic fish and sort of different nudibranchs. There's also a lot of wall diving. So this shot here was taken on one of the walls, and a lot of fan coral.
We're sailing back. It's about 5 nautical miles. We're diving out in the islands on the outer out here. Beautiful day in Tioman. Sailing along now at 6.5 knots, and there's just a bit over 8.5 knots of true wind. And the wind's on our. It's probably it's a beam reach.
This shot here is probably actually the one I like the most, and this makes you want to go diving when you see this shot. And you can see the colours and the diversity that's in the water. Once again, this is fairly deep. This is probably around 40 metre mark when this shot was taken. But the colours are so dynamic, and the amount of small fish, and where you have small bait fish like that, you've got big fish because they're coming in to eat. The other side is there's also a lot of seahorses around that area. Often they're diving though, the water's quite dirty where the seahorses are. And so in a pristine coral reef, often you won't find seahorses, but in some of these areas that probably you wouldn't want to dive is where you want to dive for macro. And so this little seahorse is literally about that big. That was shot. Here's some more shots of just the type of marine life that's there. So you've got schooling jacks that are there, and obviously eagle rays as well. So it's not uncommon to see that sort of diversity on a dive. This is another macro shot. These are very small shrimp. So these shrimp are like this big, so very small. And they normally are hiding on sea cucumbers underwater. So you turn over the sea cucumber and you find these little guys. Turtles. So actually, turtles do get hunted around that area, but there are still you'll still find turtles on dives. So there's still areas where they're around. This is actually from Tioman Island, and there are moorings in some dive sites. So that line that you can see that I'm actually attached to there was actually a mooring on that dive site. So there are areas that have recognised dive sites, and the diving is quite good, and you can just tie your boat up there and dive. This is me mucking around on a dive, I think. I think that was a decompression stop, so I probably shouldn't have been doing that. Once again, you can see the colours there. Like there's definitely, I mean, that's sort of the brightness of the reds and the colours that you see underwater there. Are probably very similar to what you find in Fiji. Slightly different types of corals, but the colour variety is amazing. Okay, so that was just a bit about photography. So as you can see, we do a fair bit. But I guess probably one of the questions you've asked around is the communications and the boat technology. So what do you need to be, sort of cruising around Asia? And particularly if you buy a vessel, what do you need to have it equipped with? So this is sort of what we have. You can have more than this, right? But this is what I'd say is the basics of what you need. So definitely, you need something that can get 3G or 4G coverage. So it could just be your phone. But you'll find that there are virtually coverage all through Indonesia. So even on Bawah, which was the middle of nowhere, you could actually get a 3G signal. So that's just using a standard phone. But you need obviously the Indonesian SIM card, but you could get coverage. And there's a bit of a joke just out of Singapore around about 2 days. There's this one coconut tree. You stand to the left of the coconut tree, you get a signal. Stand to the right, no signal. So, yeah, but you can get coverage. The other thing is satellite phones. So we actually have an Inmarsat Pro portable phone, and that's for mainly use in emergency, but also for small trips. You can use that to get weather routing, or you can use that to call your friends, etc., and get weather routing. So we actually use that on the trip from Vietnam. So you don't need to have high-end gear. You can get fairly basic gear and you still get the information you require. Of course, you could get Iridium Go or something like that if you're cruising for more than a month. But because we're doing short stints, it wasn't really worth us using the Iridium Go system, the full monthly paid one. The other one is really 4G radar. For me, 4G, we've got the BNG system, and it's been so helpful. You can set it at different ranges, so you can have one of the screens set for like 400 metres out or 300 metres out, looking at logs and things like that in the water, and then you can set the rest of the radar looking further out, looking at 8 mile, 10 mile out. And particularly at night, it's invaluable because it's hard to judge distances, particularly on the fishing vessels. The lights are so bright. What you think is very close can be a long way away, and vice versa. So definitely radar is a must for that area. But once again, don't trust it too much. So don't go to sleep and just put your radar warnings on, because I have seen vessels go straight past us, literally 20 metres away, not showing on radar. So you've got to bear that in mind as well. AIS, once again, as a foreign boat, you must have AIS. So if you don't have AIS on board, they won't clear you into the country, but it's virtually useless. So it's good for picking up all the traffic through the Singapore Straits, the big ships. Particularly if you're crossing the straits, I found it very useful because to cross a lot between Singapore and Batam, and being able to know the speed of that big tanker that's coming towards you. Is it doing 6 knots or is it doing 20 knots? Some of these tankers will do 25 knots. So, you know, if you're doing just 7 or 8 knots, you know, and it's a mile away, it can be on you in seconds. So it's AIS from that point of view I found very helpful, but for anything else it was, you know, absolutely useless. And then the final one is good crew. So at the end of the day, the best thing is line of sight. So if you need to have people that are confident that you can sleep yourself, knowing that they can look after the command of the vessel. So this is a good point. So this was very close to where we were one day. I noticed the ship sitting very strangely, and this boat's high and dry. So this is a huge tanker, and it'll be there for months because it actually ran aground right at high tide. And what's not showing on this, I should have had the drone up a bit higher, but basically the starboard marker is over there at the top corner. So this guy's just totally ignored it and just gone plowed in. That is not uncommon. All right, if that was in Australia, there'd be a massive scene about it, right? It'd be all over the news. That wasn't even reported on the news. Okay, filming and editing. So I guess at the end of the day, you don't have to go high end. You can just get a GoPro and start taking some footage. And I'll give you 5 vlogs that I recommend that you could look up and see what they're doing. Some are very well known, some you may not know of. And the way that they approach it is all very different. So one of the best vlog that I know actually don't speak at all, basically. It's all around just the visuals and the cinematography that they do. It's very high end. But there's lots of people that are doing some very interesting vlogging out there now on YouTube. So we're using a Canon 5D, but that's purely because we already have that. You don't need a Canon 5D to do it. What you do need is a good shotgun mic or some sort of mic that you can put one of these fluffy things on so that you don't get the wind noise. Because if you post anything online and you've got voiceover or whatever it is and it's windy, people are really good to give you lots of feedback online. and generally it's pretty harsh stuff, so you've got to be prepared to receive constructive criticism, but also you can sort of help things along a bit by making sure that you've got good sound quality. And then editing software, most computers nowadays come with free editing software on them, but the one that I use is Final Cut Pro. And the reason I use that is I've got a Mac, it's not that expensive, and it's pretty easy to use and gives you a good finish on your videos. And you can spend an hour putting together a video, or you could spend 5 days. It really depends on where you want to get to in your editing skills, but also your final product. And at the end of the day, a lot of people just do it because they want to keep some sort of memory of what's going on and the travels. Rather than actually make some sort of living out of it. And certainly I don't make any living or any money at all out of doing videos. So this sort of brings me to the end of the discussion, and maybe you can, if you want to ask questions, we can have a chat about that. But these are sort of the top 5. Some of these you would know, but you may not know about the top one, which I've put there, which is Sea Change. I really encourage you to do a search on YouTube. These guys are like, anyone remember ZZ Top? They've got these crazy beards down here. These are these 3 guys. It's almost like ZZ Top on water, but the quality of their footage and the quality of what they're documenting is amazing. So it's definitely number 1. Vagabond, everyone knows that, so they've been very successful on YouTube. Gone with the Winds are very interesting. They actually started off doing sort of, I guess you call it trailer caravan. They lived in a RV in the US and moved onto a cat. So it's interesting to get their perspective of people that don't know anything about sailing but are off on a cat. Follow Boat, another interesting one. And the final one that I do like is Chaser's Story. And they are an American and a British couple, and their stories are quite fun to follow. So that's it. Thank you for coming today, but if you want to ask some questions or ask questions of Brent, feel free.
In the front here.
So, I mean, that's one of the areas of why we have additional people on the boat, so that if we do come across currents and we're diving, that we've got someone to pick us up, is one point. But yeah, I mean, you're a bit limited to where you could dive if you had 15 knots. So if there was 15 knot current, I wouldn't be diving in that, unless you plan to do it. Like sometimes on like an atoll entrance, you'll have not 15 knots, but maybe about 6 knots. And I've done drift dives like that, where you say, I'm getting in the water here, we're going to get out there, and you plan it. But that's something you have to take into consideration, particularly new dive sites, which is what we were doing. And so often you wouldn't just rock up, anchor, and just go diving. You turn up and you check the conditions out, and also around that high moon, full moon period is also, you can get some pretty nasty currents. So that's something we try to avoid. It's quite interesting. You go anywhere in Indonesia, particularly in Marina or even in Malaysia, and you'll have people rock up straight away wanting to wash your boat, or another one is look after your boat. And the key is maybe not to accept the first offer. And so we got to know Andy through another person. So through another person that actually wanted to work on our boat. And it turned out to be, it was a really good fit, a very good personality, very trustworthy. And so it's around not rushing in, but just taking your time. But generally it's around word of mouth. So if you've got the time to do it, and I know my circumstances are slightly different because we're based there. But even as if I was cruising a new area, I would definitely think about maybe doing something like that because it makes a big difference. There's some places, islands we visited, where we would anchor near their island, but would give them like a bag of rice, quite a big bag of rice, because they're so remote. Once you leave Singapore and Batam area, you're virtually in the middle of nowhere. There's places that hardly get any traffic at all. They don't see a lot of people.
I've heard of stories where yachties have gone around catching fish and dropping them off to the islands as they've gone through, similar to that rice story. Is that practice there, or?
I don't do that because I think from a value perspective they can catch their own fish, but they can't go catch rice. So I try and give them something that's unique and more beneficial. I used to do that when I lived in Papua New Guinea, so I enjoyed spearfishing. But Isabella complained the freezer was full of fish all the time, so I used to give my fish away that I would spear and to the local people, etc. But that was purely something different. But generally I try and give them something a bit more unique. So rice is fairly cheap, but for them it's quite difficult for them to get a 10 kilo bag of rice would be quite hard in these remote spots. Yeah, so that's an interesting point. Not necessarily run-ins, but just lots of avoidance. And so that trip where we did the 4-day passage from Vietnam to Singapore, at night it was just constant lights on the horizon, and it was never ending. So that Southeast China Sea, that's sort of from Vietnam up that area where everyone's complaining about right now with China. That is virtually dead, that sea, because it's just been netted out. Can you imagine a sea that's only 50 metres deep across the whole sea, and there's thousands of ships drag netting every night, not much left. So the key was use the radar to pick up the boats, and then alter course to get it away from them. Sometimes at night, if you're just relying on eye of sight, you can't actually tell which direction the boat is travelling, or if they're travelling, trawling nets. And there's also a lot of boats being towed. So sometimes you've got vessels that might have up to around about, longest tow I've seen was probably about a 500 metre tow. So if you were to go in between those two vessels, you'd have a problem there's also that to think of. But definitely radar helps, but then you really sort of just to be vigilant and not try and cross too close to any vessel.
You stayed along as far as you could away.
Yeah, it was around altering course. So generally in Australian waters you might have gone a bit closer, but wherever we thought something was a bit odd, we would move away or change sail so that we weren't going too close to them. I think the closest we came to a vessel was in the first night when we first left Ho Chi Minh, and there was two of us. I was on watch with Craig, and you couldn't actually tell which direction this boat was coming directly for us. So, I mean, you can see the port and starboard marker. It was a big boat, but what we didn't realise how quickly it was travelling, and so we eventually jibed off, and luckily we jibed to the starboard. So we got that right. But that was really around first night at sea. Often you tend to screw up a bit, but once you get settled into it, you soon realise which way to turn. Yeah, it's around avoiding them. So it's hard for them to gang up on you if you're
Busy fishing.
yeah, and probably the most instances with fishing vessels have always been at night, and that's around them coming up on your sides, and you're not really paying attention, or if you've got someone that's say looking after the starboard side and they've fallen asleep or something like that. Those things happen, but it's really around being vigilant and then changing your course as quickly as possible. You would never in Asia call starboard because no one knows what the hell that is. So it's around common sense sort of, but yeah, just keep clear. Yeah, on a sailing vessel, first of all, I've never seen a submerged container, but I've seen lots of logs. So the more thing you will see in Asia is logs and debris in the water, but not containers. That said, I think in a sailing vessel with forward scanning radar, you're not going to be able to alter your boat quick enough to miss it. I can't really see it happening. I think you might pick it up on radar. So 4G radar will pick up disturbances in the water, provided the sea state's not crazy. But the most issues we've had is logs, and so we've struck logs, but they've branched off down the side, and then we're big ones. But I know people that have hit big logs, and that'll do more damage. That does a lot of damage to your boat. So where possible, I will try and avoid sailing at night, but there are times you have to sail at night. But I don't know of any boats that have hit containers, but I know boats that have hit reefs and have hit logs. Two rudders help, but probably the biggest problem we had once was fishing nets. So there's a lot of fishing nets that are just adrift, and we had both engines get caught up in fishing nets. So spent hours, had to take the props off to get the fishing nets off. So to me, it's around logs. Fishing nets would be the big issue. Containers, not so much. You talk to people in Asia, they say like the northwest monsoon, really rough, and that's nothing to our coast here, right? So if you can sail in the waters off here, you can sail in Asia. You might get some short chop, but that's about it. It's nothing to what I've had off of Jervis Bay, 40 knot southerly.
So you wouldn't get the bigger swells, and again, quoting another participant here, is greatest fear would be big seas, big weather, big storms. It's anything to worry about that so much?
No, my greatest fear is probably logs in the water, actually, and then unscheduled blows, so like that 40 knots where it's not forecast and suddenly you get smashed by 40 knots. So you've got to have, whenever you anchor anywhere at night, you've got to have, I need to be out of here in 5 minutes. So never leave your dinghy down in the water, have your boat ready to go. And if you do that, then you at least minimise the risk. You've still got risk, but it's less risk, unless you're on a mooring. So that's why Bawah is so nice. It's just, you just tie up.
There's a cost for those moorings, etc.
No, it was free when we were there. I'm sure in the future they may charge, but probably not a lot. At that point, they were free.
we were just doing, weeks. I think the longest trip we've done was 2 weeks, and then we come back and I go back to work. I think to budget for that area, your biggest costs will probably be fuel. And fuel is really cheap there. It's for diesel and even for petrol, it's under $1 a litre, so it's pretty cheap. The other expense would be around probably if you want to stay at Marina for a bit. So it is nice to be able to come back to Marina and just chill out and not have to worry about being at anchor, etc. But marinas also, the costs vary. So you could, if you're in Thailand, a marina charge could be up, depending on the size of your boat, could be $1,000 a month. Where we are, it's around $400 a month for a 40-foot cat. It's pretty cheap. So really it's fuel costs and then whatever you spend on food. Yeah, so the Seawinds come in different versions. So you could get our vessel that I've got with diesel engines, but we chose the Seawind Lite, which is using petrol. So these are just outboards. And the reason for that is that it's very easy to service the boat. If you've got a problem with one of the engines, you can just lift it up, take it into a local mechanic, and everyone basically in Asia knows how to fix an outboard, but there's not many people that know how to fix diesels. So that's one reason why. And it's cheaper too. So if you buy a Seawind that's a Seawind Lite, it's a lot cheaper than the Seawind with diesels. You can buy the same rebreathers here locally. There are stores, dive stores here that sell that type of rebreather. But most rebreathers are either made in the US or Europe. Interesting, there was a show just recently, Oztech, which is just here, and they have some, I think it's French, but for around about $6,000 you can buy a rebreather now. So you don't have to spend a lot of money, but generally the type of rebreathers that we're using, these are $10,000 to $12,000 rebreathers. But once you buy them once, they basically don't wear out. A compressor, a Bawah compressor, will cost around about $5,500 for a new one. And then once you've got that, once again, it'll last for quite a long time.
Is there any good reefs you can attack with a hooker?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the areas you could just, you can snorkel them if you want to. Hooker is also a really good way to dive. I guess the type of diving we're trying to do though is get down to the areas that are quite deep, and obviously the coral's more pristine, because when you think about it, a lot of but also a lot of areas, if you go to a very populated site, it's been dived out at 20 metres, but if you go down to 50 metres, it's not many people that have dived at 50 metres on that site. So the coral's more pristine. Often there's bigger pelagic fish down there as well. It's how you use it, but to give you an idea, on a rebreather, you're changing the mix. So often when people dive on open circuit, you just start with one mix, and it might be, say, 21%, which is air. Or you might be a nitrox diver, and you're diving, let's say it's like 30% nitrox. You've got that for the whole dive. On a rebreather, you can adjust it. So when you're shallow, you can be breathing 100% oxygen or 80% oxygen, which obviously allows you to gas off nitrogen really quickly. So, I would say that diving a rebreather is safer, because as you come shallower, you can dive a better mix, and you can actually reduce the risk of decompression sickness. That's one side to it. I mean, there's other people who might have other opinions. Yes. So I have been snagged in quite shallow water. It was about 10 metres, but it was where they'd put other mooring lines, and you didn't know it was there, so the anchor was snagged. So that's a great thing about being a diver too. You just dive on it and unhook it. So to me, sailing, diving go together for a number of reasons, and then photography is just another hobby. But definitely, sailing and diving is a very good mix. Even sometimes, if we're coming up to a site to anchor for the night, I always dive the anchor. And so I rarely ever, maybe in my early days when I was first sailing, I'd probably set anchors without diving, but now I always dive the anchor. It just makes me, I can sleep well. There's nothing worse than dragging anchor.
Yeah, you mentioned the usefulness of bilingual brew. What type of situations did you encounter where you think it was really helpful or needed to have someone speaking the local language?
Yeah, probably the most one was when those fishermen turned up. That there was 12 of them on board, and because that anchor's so close, the vibes I was getting back from Andy is we probably shouldn't hang around here. They were friendly, but it just, you could tell he was getting some bad vibes. I wouldn't have been able to tell that if I was just speaking English to them. But that said, it's also helpful around anchoring. So you turn up somewhere, and often the local people come out and tell you where to anchor. But I've also had a situation, this is in Vietnam, where the local fisherman said, anchor here, and it was the worst anchorage ever.
Our soul. We have a mission. We are all searching for that one moment when the music captures our soul. When the music captures our soul. We have a mission. We are all searching for that one moment when the music captures our soul. When the music captures our soul.